Malik Carter's dream is crumbling. His grandfather's beloved bookstore, Turning Pages, is barely staying afloat, and every overdue bill is a reminder of his failing legacy. But when he sits across from a beautiful, down-to-earth philanthropist, on a blind date, hope flickers in his heart. Ella Jameson seems perfect, kind, passionate, and just as in love with literature as he is. What Malik doesn't know? Ella is actually Elle Beaumont, a billionaire hiding her true identity. Their romance is electric, but when Malik uncovers the truth, his world shatters. Feeling betrayed and powerless, will he walk away from the woman he loves or fight for a love that's worth more than wealth? Before we dive in, buckle up, get ready, and subscribe for a special surprise tomorrow. Malik Carter stood in the middle of his bookstore, Turning Pages, staring at the stack of overdue bills on the counter. The air smelled like old paper and freshly brewed coffee from the cafe next door, but even the familiar scent couldn't settle the unease churning in his chest. The store, his grandfather's legacy, was barely holding on. He had done everything: discounts, community events, late-night promotions, but nothing seemed to be enough. He sighed, running a hand over his short-cropped hair. The wooden shelves that once held the weight of his childhood dreams now carried the burden of reality. His best friend and longtime employee, Jada, leaned against the register, watching him with knowing eyes. "Malik, you need a break," she said, crossing her arms. "All you do is stress over this place. When's the last time you did something for yourself?" He scoffed, shuffling the bills into a messy pile. "I don't have time for that, Jada. Keeping this place open is all that matters." "That's funny," she mused, tapping her chin, "because I already set you up on a blind date for tonight." Malik snapped his head up. "You what?" "Yep," she grinned. "Her name's Elle. She's smart, loves books, and actually agreed to meet you, so try not to screw this up." "Jada." "Nope." She held up a hand, cutting him off. "You need this. One night away from this place won't kill you." He opened his mouth to argue, but the exhaustion in his bones told him she was right. He hadn't been on a date in years. Maybe a night out would be good for him, if only to forget just for a little while that his life was unraveling. By the time he arrived at the cafe, he was already regretting his decision. His mind was still tangled in thoughts of unpaid rent and dwindling sales. He adjusted the sleeves of his navy button-down and took a steadying breath before stepping inside, and then he saw her. Elle sat at a corner table, her auburn curls framing a delicate face. She was effortlessly elegant yet understated. No flashy jewelry, no expensive designer logos, just a simple green dress that made her brown eyes stand out. She looked up, and when their eyes met, she smiled. Something in Malik's chest tightened. "Malik?" she asked, standing to greet him. He nodded, shaking her hand. Her grip was soft but firm, confident. "I hope you weren't waiting long," he said, pulling out his chair. "Not at all." Elle tilted her head slightly, studying him. "I hear you own a bookstore." He chuckled, some of his nerves easing. "More like I'm trying to keep it from going under." Her smile deepened. "That means you care about it. That's worth more than success." Malik blinked, caught off guard by her words. He hadn't expected someone to see the struggle that way. Maybe, just maybe, this night wouldn't be so bad after all. Malik hadn't expected conversation to flow so easily. Most dates felt like interviews, a forced exchange of pleasantries, with no real substance. But with Elle, it was different. "So what made you open a bookstore?" she asked, swirling her tea with the tip of her spoon. "My grandfather," Malik said, leaning back in his chair. "He opened Turning Pages before I was born. He always believed bookstores were the heart of a community, a place where people could escape, learn, or just belong. I grew up in that shop, stacking shelves before I could even read." He exhaled, glancing away. "I promised him I'd keep it alive." Elle watched him carefully, her fingers resting lightly against her cup. "And is it alive?" Malik hesitated. The truth was bitter, and he hated how it tasted in his mouth. "Barely, I see." She didn't pity him, and that surprised him. Most people would offer empty encouragements, but she just nodded as if she understood. "What about you?" he asked. "Jada said you work in philanthropy?" Ella smiled. "I do. I help fund small businesses and independent ventures, trying to give them a fighting chance." Malik's eyebrows lifted. "So you're out here saving businesses like mine?" Ella laughed softly. "Something like that." Their eyes locked, and for a moment the noise of the cafe faded. There was something disarming about her, something that made Malik want to keep talking, to unravel the layers of this woman who sat across from him with genuine interest. "I have to ask," he said, resting his elbows on the table. "Why philanthropy? You could have done anything." Her smile faltered, just slightly, and for the first time he sensed hesitation. "Because I've seen what happens when good businesses get swallowed up by greed. I wanted to help people fight back." Something about the way she said it made Malik feel like there was more to the story, but he didn't push. He respected that kind of restraint because he carried his own. "Well," he said, picking up his glass, "here's to fighting back." Elle's lips curved upward as she lifted her own cup, tapping it gently against his. To fighting back. They talked for hours. About books, about dreams, about the kind of childhoods that shaped them. Ella listened with an intensity that made Malik feel seen, in a way he hadn't in years. She laughed at his dry humor, challenged his thoughts on classic literature, and when she admitted that her favorite book changed, depending on her mood, Malik grinned. "That's cheating," he teased. "It's realistic," she countered. By the time the cafe dimmed its lights signaling closing time, Malik realized he didn't want the night to end. He walked Elle outside, the cool night air wrapping around them. "I had a great time," she said, brushing a curl behind her ear. "Me too," Malik admitted. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he had something to look forward to. Malik found himself smiling at random moments the next day, replaying pieces of last night's conversation like a favorite song. It had been a long time since he'd felt this way. Light, hopeful, distracted in the best way possible. But reality had a way of pulling him back. He sat behind the counter at turning pages, skimming through invoices, his mind wrestling with the numbers that refused to balance. The store was surviving by a thread, and he knew that without something changing soon he'd be forced to make a decision he wasn't ready for. The front door chimed, and Malik looked up, half expecting another customer to wander in. Instead, Elle stood there holding 2 coffees. "You again?" he said, surprised but pleased. "You sound disappointed." She handed him a cup. "Not at all," he grinned. "But I should warn you, showing up unannounced might make me think you like me." She raised an eyebrow. "And if I do?" Malik wasn't used to women being so direct, and yet, with Ella, it didn't feel forced, it felt natural. He leaned on the counter, meeting her gaze. "Then I'd say I like you too." She smiled, setting down her bag. "Good, because I was hoping you'd let me see more of this place." Malik led her through the bookstore, pointing out sections, showing her the reading nook in the back, the old wooden ladder he had used as a kid to reach the highest shelves. She listened, asking thoughtful questions, trailing her fingers along the spines of books as if they were old friends. "This place has character," she murmured. "I like to think so," he said. "It's just hard convincing people to step inside when they can buy everything online." Elle stopped, looking at him seriously. "Do you ever think about expanding? Making it more than a bookstore?" He sighed. "I've thought about everything. Book clubs, poetry nights, even turning the back into a cafe. But all of that takes money I don't have." She studied him for a moment, as if weighing something in her mind. "If you had the money, what would be the first thing you'd do?" Malik chuckled, shaking his head. "Why? Are you secretly a business consultant?" "Maybe," she teased. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'd probably renovate the space first. Make it a little more inviting. A place where people actually want to stay instead of just grabbing a book and leaving." Elle nodded. "That's a good idea." Malik didn't know why, but the way she said it made him feel like it wasn't just a passing comment, like she was actually considering how to make it happen. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking, the conversation shifting between business and books, personal dreams and childhood memories. And when Elle finally left, Malik realized something. She wasn't just someone he enjoyed being around. She was someone who made him want to believe in possibilities again. Malik hadn't expected to see Elle again so soon, but over the next few weeks, she became a regular presence in his life. She stopped by turning pages in the mornings with coffee, browsed the shelves in the afternoons, and sometimes stayed late into the evening, sitting in the cozy reading nook with a book in her lap. It felt easy, effortless, as if she had always been a part of his world. Their conversation stretched beyond books and business. She told him about growing up in New York, about how she had once dreamed of being a writer before life pulled her in another direction. He told her about his grandfather, how the old man used to read to him under the dim glow of a bookstore lamp. They shared stories, laughter, and quiet moments that felt heavier than words. One evening, as the store neared closing, Elle lingered by the register, watching him count the till. "You should let me take you out," she said. Malik smirked. "You mean on a date?" She tilted her head, feigning thoughtfulness. "Or we could call it an investment opportunity." He laughed, shaking his head. "I don't know if I can afford the kind of places you like." Her smile was teasing. "Who said I like expensive places?" Still, when she picked him up the next evening, he wasn't surprised to find himself at a restaurant with dim lighting, linen tablecloths, and soft jazz playing in the background. He glanced at her as they were led to their table. "So, you do like expensive places," he said, amused. Elle laughed. "I like places with good food, and this place happens to have the best steak in the city." They ordered, their conversation flowing effortlessly, Malik found himself more relaxed than he had been in weeks, letting go of the ever-present weight on his shoulders. Then, as their meals arrived, Ella leaned forward slightly. "I've been thinking about your bookstore." Malik tensed instinctively. "What about it?" "You have something special, Malik," she said. "You just need the right push. Have you ever considered applying for a grant?" He scoffed. "Grants don't just fall out of the sky. Besides, those things take forever, and even if I got one, it wouldn't be enough to keep the store running long term." "What if there was another way?" she asked carefully. Malik narrowed his eyes. "Like what?" Elle hesitated for just a second, then smiled. "Like someone investing in it, believing in it the way you do." Something in her voice made him pause. There was an intensity in her gaze, something unspoken. But before he could dwell on it, she reached for her wine glass. The conversation shifting. That night, as he walked her to her car, Malik couldn't shake the feeling that Elle knew something he didn't. And for the first time, doubt crept into the back of his mind. Malik couldn't shake the feeling that Elle was holding something back. It wasn't anything obvious. She was still the same warm, intelligent woman who challenged him on literature and made him laugh at unexpected moments. But ever since their dinner, a quiet tension had settled between them. She had planted an idea in his mind, one that he couldn't ignore. The next afternoon, as he sat at the register flipping through invoices, the door chimed. A man in a sharp gray suit stepped inside, his gaze scanning the bookstore before locking onto Malik. "Malik. Carter?" Malik straightened. "Yeah, that's me." The man approached, pulling a card from his pocket and placing it on the counter. "I'm Nathan Ellis. I represent Beaumont Enterprises. I wanted to talk to you about a potential offer on your store." Malik felt his stomach drop. He knew that name. Beaumont Enterprises was one of the largest development firms in the city, known for buying up small businesses and turning them into high-end retail spaces. "I'm not selling," he said firmly. Ellis smiled politely. "I understand your attachment to the store, but I also understand financial strain." He gestured at the invoices stacked beside the register. "We're prepared to make you a generous offer, one that could clear all of your debts and set you up for something new." Malik clenched his jaw. He hated how tempting that sounded. "I said no," he repeated. Ellis nodded, slipping his card across the counter. "Think it over. The offer stands." As soon as the man walked out, Malik let out a slow breath. He had spent years fighting to keep Turning Pages alive, refusing to let it become another casualty of corporate greed. But now, with bills piling up and customers growing scarce, he felt trapped between his principles and his reality. That evening, when Elle stopped by, Malik was still stewing over the offer. She greeted him with a soft smile, leaning on the counter. "Rough day? You could say that," he exhaled, rubbing his temples. "Beaumont Enterprises wants to buy the store." Ella's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "What did you say?" "I told them no." He studied her face. "But it got me thinking. They wouldn't come after my shop unless they saw value in it. Maybe I've been looking at this all wrong. Maybe I need to do something different." Elle nodded slowly. "What do you think that looks like?" "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I know I can't let this place die." She reached across the counter, her fingers brushing against his. "Then don't." For a moment, Malik felt grounded again, as if the chaos around him had quieted. But as Elle squeezed his hand, a nagging thought crept into his mind. Why did she seem unsurprised by the offer? And why did it feel like she already knew what was coming? Malik couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. The offer from Beaumont Enterprises gnawed at him, but what unsettled him more was Ella's reaction. She hadn't been surprised. No shock, no outrage, just calm understanding. It didn't sit right with him. By morning, the feeling hadn't faded. He went through his usual routine at Turning Pages, shelving books, making small talk with customers, but his focus was elsewhere. When Elle walked in that afternoon, carrying 2 coffees like she always did, Malik found himself studying her differently. "You look like you're thinking too hard," she teased, placing his coffee on the counter. He took it, but instead of his usual playful remark, he leaned forward. "How well do you know Beaumont Enterprises?" Ella hesitated just for a second. Most people wouldn't have noticed it, but Malik did. She recovered quickly, tucking a loose curl behind her ear. "Why?" He crossed his arms. "Because when I told you about their offer, you didn't seem surprised, almost like you already knew." Ella's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "I didn't want to make a big deal out of it." "That's not an answer," Malik said, his voice quieter now. Elle sighed, setting her coffee down. "I know people in the business world, Malik. That's all. Companies like Beaumont go after independent stores all the time." He studied her, wanting to believe her, but doubt had already settled in. That evening, as he closed up shop, Malik found himself searching online for Beaumont Enterprises. He had never bothered looking into them before, just knew them as the enemy of small businesses. But this time he dug deeper, and that's when he saw her name. L. Beaumont. His stomach twisted as he clicked the article, scanning the details. CEO of Beaumont Enterprises, billionaire. Her face, the same face that had spent the last month, sitting in his bookstore smiling at him over coffee, staring back at him from a business magazine cover, his hands clenched into fists. She had lied to him. All those conversations about struggling businesses, about supporting small shops, had it all been an act? Was she just watching him flounder, waiting for him to break so she could swoop in and buy him out? Malik slammed his laptop shut, heart pounding. He felt like a fool. The next morning, when Ella walked in like nothing had changed, Malik barely looked at her. "I know who you are," he said, his voice hard. Elle froze mid-step. "Malik, don't," he snapped. "Don't stand there and act like this is nothing. You lied to me." Her face paled. "I didn't lie." "No," he scoffed. "You let me believe you were just some kind-hearted philanthropist when, the whole time, you're a billionaire CEO. You let me sit here and stress about losing my store while your company was the one trying to take it from me." Elle took a shaky breath. "I never wanted to hurt you." Malik let out a bitter laugh. "Well, congratulations. You did." And with that, he turned away, leaving her standing there in silence. Elle didn't leave right away. She stood there, gripping the strap of her bag, her face etched with something Malik didn't want to name. Regret, maybe, or guilt. But he didn't care. He couldn't care. "Malik," she started again, softer this time. He busied himself with stacking books on the counter, his jaw tight. "You should go. I need you to listen to me." Malik let out a sharp breath and finally met her gaze. "Listen to what? More half-truths? More excuses? You watched me stress over this place, knowing your company was the one trying to take it, and you never said a damn thing." "I was going to tell you," she said. He barked, out a laugh. "When? When the ink was dry on the deal? When I was packing up my life in boxes?" "No," she snapped, then closed her eyes for a second, regaining control. "I never wanted to buy your store, Malik. I never wanted Beaumont Enterprises to touch it, but they did." His voice was lower now, filled with something raw. "And you still lied to me." Elle exhaled shakily, stepping closer. "I didn't tell you who I was because I wanted you to see me. Not my name, not my money. I didn't want that to be the reason you let me in." Malik's fists clenched at his sides. "So what? You thought you'd just pretend to be normal? Play the role of a struggling business supporter while sitting on a billion-dollar empire? Do you even understand what it's like? To fight every day just to keep something alive?" Pain flashed in her eyes. "I do understand, Malik." "Yeah?" He shook his head. "Then tell me what part of your life is a struggle. The part where you don't have to check your bank account before paying rent? Or the part where you can make problems disappear just by throwing money at them?" Elle flinched, and for a second he almost regretted his words. Almost. She swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You really think this was just a game to me?" Malik didn't answer. He couldn't. The silence stretched between them, heavy and final. Elle's shoulders dropped slightly, as if she knew there was no coming back from this moment. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said again, this time with a quiet sadness that dug into his chest. He looked away. "Doesn't change the fact that you did." A long pause, then slowly Elle nodded. She took a step back, and when he didn't stop her, she turned and walked out of the store. The bell above the door jingled, and then she was gone. Malik stood there for a long time after, staring at the empty space she left behind. The bookstore felt quieter than usual, almost hollow. He should have felt relieved. Instead, all he felt was the ache of something breaking inside him. Malik went through the next few weeks in a fog. The bookstore still needed running, bills still needed paying, and customers still needed help, but everything felt dull. Conversations felt forced. The comfort of old books no longer held the same warmth, and every time the bell above the door jingled, he had to remind himself it wouldn't be Elle. Jada noticed, of course. She always did. "You look like hell," she said one afternoon, leaning against the register with her arms crossed. "Thanks," Malik muttered, not looking up from the inventory sheet in front of him. Jada huffed. "I mean it. You've been walking around like a zombie for weeks. What's going on?" "Nothing," he said too quickly. Jada narrowed her eyes. "Liar," he sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's over with Elle." She didn't seem surprised. "What happened?" Malik hesitated, then shook his head. "She lied. He exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the counter. "She's not who I thought she was." Jada studied him, then asked the question he had been avoiding. "Do you still love her?" Malik froze. Did he? He wanted to say no. Wanted to say that Elle's betrayal had erased every good memory, that her wealth had been a barrier too big to overcome, but the truth sat heavy in his chest. "Yes," he admitted, voice low, "and that's the worst part." Jada didn't gloat or lecture him. Instead, she placed a hand on his arm, grounding him. "Then maybe you need to figure out what matters more, the way she hurt you, or the way she made you feel before all this." Malik had no answer. That night, He lay, awake in bed, staring at the ceiling again. But this time, instead of replaying the moment he found out Elle's secret, he thought about everything else. The way she had listened, truly listened, when he talked about his dreams. The way she had encouraged him, challenged him, made him believe in possibilities again. Had she lied? Yes. But had her feelings been real? Malik didn't know anymore. The next morning, he arrived at the bookstore early, pushing open the door with a sigh. But as soon as he stepped inside, he stopped. Short. There was an envelope on the counter, placed neatly beside the register. His name was written across it in familiar, elegant handwriting. L. His heart pounded as he picked it up, fingers trembling slightly. He hesitated, then tore it open, unfolding the letter inside. Malik, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to want to see me again. But I need you to know, what I felt for you was never a lie. You once told me this bookstore was your home. I hope you never stop fighting for it. El Malik sat down heavily, the letter clutched in his hands. For the first time since she left, he wasn't angry. He was just lost. Malik read the letter again, slower this time, letting each word settle in his chest. He had expected anger when he saw her handwriting, maybe even resentment. But all he felt was a deep, aching sadness. What I felt for you was never a lie. That should have made things easier, but it only complicated everything. If her feelings had been real, then what did that mean for him? Was it possible to still love someone and not trust them? The letter gave him no answers, only more questions. For the rest of the day, Malik tried to focus on the bookstore, but his thoughts were stuck on Elle. He didn't even realize Jada had come in until she snapped her fingers in front of his face. "Okay," she said, sitting on the counter. "You're officially useless today. What's going on?" He sighed, running a hand over his face before handing her the letter. Jada read it, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she folded the paper neatly and set it down beside her. "She still loves you," she said simply. Malik let out a hollow laugh. "That doesn't change what she did." "No," Jada agreed, "but it means you have a choice." Malik frowned. "What choice?" Jada looked at him like he was missing something obvious. "You can either stay mad and let this be the end, or you can figure out if what you had with her is worth fixing." "That's not how it works," Malik muttered. Jada shrugged. "Maybe not, but let me ask you something. Do you want this to be over?" Malik opened his mouth, ready to say yes, to say that Elle had hurt him too much to ever go back. But when he thought about never seeing her again, never hearing her laugh or watching her eyes light up when she found a book she loved, the words stuck in his throat. Jada smirked. "That's what I thought." That night, Malik found himself staring at his phone, Elle's number glowing on the screen. He had typed out a dozen messages only to delete them each time. He wanted to say something, but nothing felt right. Instead, he set his phone down and grabbed his notebook, flipping to a fresh page. If he couldn't say it out loud, maybe he could write it. The words came slowly at first, then all at once. He wrote about how angry he had been, how betrayed he had felt, but he also wrote about the good, about how she made him feel seen, how she made him believe in something bigger than himself. When he finished, he read it over, then folded the page and placed it in an envelope. He didn't know if he would ever send it, but for the first time since Elle had left, he felt like he was finally taking a step forward. Malik woke up the next morning with the envelope still sitting on his nightstand. He had stayed up late, rereading his own words, debating whether sending it was the right thing to do. A part of him still held on to the anger, the feeling of betrayal that came with knowing Elle had been keeping secrets. But another part of him, the part that ached every time he thought of her, wondered if maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of their story. By the time he opened the bookstore, he had made up his mind. He wasn't going to send the letter. He was going to give it to her in person. If she still wanted to hear what he had to say, that was. The problem was, he had no idea where to find her. Ella had vanished from his life after that last conversation, and unlike before, she wasn't just going to show up at the store with coffee and a smile. He needed to go to her. Jada, of course, was the one who figured it out. "You're lucky I'm nosy," she said, as she slid a piece of paper across the counter. Malik picked it up and, "Read the address. She owns an art gallery?" he asked, surprised. Jada smirked. "Apparently, it's not some big flashy thing either. She funds local artists, gives them a space to show their work, kind of like how she supports small businesses." Malik exhaled. "Yeah, I guess that makes sense." Jada crossed her arms. "So, are you going to sit here all day? Or are you going to go talk to her?" Malik didn't answer. He just grabbed the envelope, tucked it into his jacket, and walked out the door. The gallery was tucked into a quiet part of the city, unassuming but elegant. Inside, soft lighting illuminated the artwork on the walls, a mix of abstract paintings and photography that told stories he didn't fully understand. Elle was at the far end of the room, speaking with an artist. She looked different, more reserved, like she was carrying something heavy, but when she turned and spotted him standing near the entrance, her breath visibly caught. Malik took a step forward, then another. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Elle said, almost cautiously, "What are you doing here?" Malik pulled the envelope from his jacket and held it out. "I wrote you something." She hesitated, then took it, her fingers brushing against his for a brief second. She unfolded the letter and began reading. Malik watched as her expression shifted. Uncertainty, sadness, hope. By the time she finished, her eyes were glassy. He swallowed. "I don't know where we go from here, but I know I don't want to lose you." Elle looked up at him, searching his face. Then she took a deep breath and whispered, "Neither do I." Elle folded the letter carefully, holding it against her chest as if it were something fragile. Malik stood there, his heart pounding, waiting for her to say something, anything that would tell him where they stood. Finally, she exhaled, shaking her head with a small, breathless laugh. "You always know how to say the right thing, don't you?" Malik let out a nervous chuckle. "Not always, but I meant every word." She looked up at him, her brown eyes filled with emotions he couldn't quite name. "I wanted to tell you, Malik, so many times, but every time I tried, She stopped, pressing her lips together. "I was scared. I didn't want my name, my money to change how you saw me." Malik nodded slowly. "I get that, but Elle, what hurt the most wasn't just the lie. It was knowing you didn't trust me enough to handle the truth." Her eyes flickered with guilt. "I know, and I hate that I made you feel that way." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Malik shifted on his feet, running, a hand over his jaw. "So where do we go from here?" Ella hesitated, looking down at the letter again. When she looked back up, her expression was softer, more certain. "I want to fix this. I don't want us to end like this, Malik, but I need to know if you can forgive me." Malik let out a slow breath. Could he? He thought about the anger, the betrayal, the way he had felt like a fool when he found out who she really was. But then he thought about everything else, the late nights in the bookstore, the way she had always believed in his dreams, the way she had looked at him like he was something more than just a struggling bookstore owner. He didn't need more time to decide. "I don't want to pretend like none of it happened," he said. "But I also don't want to lose you over it." Ella's breath hitched, and for the first time in weeks her lips curved into something that looked like hope. "Then we figure it out," she whispered. Malik nodded, a slow smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Yeah, we figure it out." For the first time since everything had fallen apart, Malik felt like the ground beneath him was steady again. He wasn't sure what the future looked like, but for now, standing here in this quiet art gallery staring at the woman he had fallen for, he knew one thing. Elle had made mistakes. So had he. But love, real love, was worth fighting for, and this time he wasn't going to let it slip away. The grand reopening of Turning Pages was busier than Malik had expected. The small bookstore, once quiet and on the brink of collapse, now buzzed with life. Customers browsed the shelves, the scent of fresh coffee from a new cafe corner mingling with the familiar aroma of old books. Soft jazz played in the background, and the hum of conversation filled the air. Malik stood near the register, taking it all in. The renovations had been simple: new lighting, refinished floors, a fresh coat of paint. But the biggest change wasn't physical, it was the energy. The bookstore wasn't just surviving anymore, it was thriving. "Not bad," Jada said, nudging him. "You might actually make this work." Malik smirked. "Don't sound too surprised. Just saying. A few months ago, you were about to lose everything. Now look at you." She crossed her arms, glancing around. "People are here because they believe in this place, and a certain someone believed in you before you even believed in yourself." Malik followed her gaze to the doorway. Elle stood there watching him. She wasn't dressed like the billionaire CEO of Beaumont Enterprises. She wasn't the woman who had walked into his store under an alias, hiding who she was. She was just Ellie, the woman who had listened to his dreams, who had challenged him, who had hurt him, but who had also fought for him in ways he hadn't understood until now. Malik took a slow breath and made his way toward her. "You came," he said softly. Elle smiled. "Of course I did. I wasn't going to miss this." He studied her for a moment, remembering how much had changed between them, how much had almost been lost. "Do you want to see what we built?" Her eyes softened at the word "we." "I'd love to," she said. He led her through the store, showing her the small cafe area, the new event space for book readings and poetry nights. "It's not just a bookstore anymore," he said, watching. Her reaction? L.A. turned to him, her gaze warm. "It never was. It's a home." Malik swallowed, his chest tight. "I don't think I ever told you this," he said carefully, "but you made me believe in this place again, even when I didn't want to." Elle's lips curved. "I always believed in you, Malik." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Malik reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't some dramatic, sweeping declaration. It was simple, honest. "Stay," he murmured. Elle squeezed his hand. "I'm not going anywhere." Bookstore buzzed around them, but in that moment it didn't matter. What mattered was that they had found their way back to each other. And this time, neither of them was running. Their next chapter was just beginning.